Well, thank you so much. As Steve said, I know some of you have advanced degrees in economics, others of you may not. I'm starting with chapter one. This course is going to get pretty high level in terms of some pretty sophisticated discussions of tax policy, macroeconomic stuff, but we have to start chapter one, day one. So for some of you, this might be a little bit of a repetitive or a refresher from some things you learned before, but hopefully it'll at least be entertaining. I'm going to try to talk about the material that will be in the first two chapters today, and then chapters 3 and 4 next week, which is mostly supply and demand for next week. So today's really just about the basic economic principles. You know, economics really can be divided into two categories. There's microeconomics and macroeconomics. Macroeconomics has to do with the big questions about the economy: recessions, unemployment, inflation, monetary policy, fiscal policy, budget deficits. So those things are going to be like mostly the second half of the course. The first half really is the foundations, which are microeconomics, because even macroeconomics is based on microeconomics, which is the study of how individuals and how business firms make choices, and how those choices are influenced by the incentives that they face. So today what I'm going to be doing is basically helping to provide that introduction to the microeconomics component. Every economics textbook starts out with the first basic idea in economics, which is scarcity. The idea is that there's not enough stuff freely available from nature to fully fulfill human desires for most things. Now, there are some things that aren't scarce, like go ahead and take a breath. Have another, it's on me. You can, in fact, take as many as you want, right? There's no scarcity of air in here. We can just breathe as much as we want. But for the vast majority of things, we've got a problem of scarcity. There's not as much stuff freely available from nature as we would all like. Not enough BMWs, not even enough time in our day. Even our time is scarce. And what scarcity forces is two things. First is choice. So because my time is scarce, when I get home tonight, I'll be like, okay, I've only got 2 hours. I'd like to do some yard work, but I also really want to watch that TV show, but yet my neighbor wants to have me come over and hang. I got to make a choice. What do I do? Any one of those things I do, I can't do the other things. So scarcity forces us to make choices among alternatives. And that really is the heart of economics, is thinking about how people's choices among the alternatives they face is influenced by public policies or the incentives that they face. The other thing scarcity forces on us is a problem of rationing. You know, if I only had 2 cups of Starbucks coffee and everybody here wanted them, how would I decide which 2 of you get them? Right? There's many ways we could ration things. You can do it a lottery. We could randomly pick out names. We could auction things off like you do on eBay. Just the 2 highest bidders can get it. At Florida State University, where I got my PhD, well, I was back there when they were winning national championships. There were 3,000 free student tickets. Great. Well, the problem is there's a 25,000 student body, and for the big games, number 1 versus number 2, there might be 15,000 students wanting 3,000 tickets. How do you solve that problem? Well, at Florida State, and they do the same thing at Duke for their basketball tickets, it's first come, first serve. That is, the tickets, they'll just start handing them out, and when they're out, they're out. And so what used to happen at Florida State is right before the big games, you'd see lines of tents camped up. And they used to keep track of the last person in line who got a ticket, how long they had been waiting. For the biggest games of the year, it would take 3 days. So the last person to actually get the 3,000th ticket had been camping out in line for 3 days. So there'd be these periods where you're teaching on campus where your students just wouldn't be in the room because they're out waiting in line for these football tickets. The point of why I tell a little more detailed example is that to an economist, the issue here is what mechanism we use for rationing influences people's behavior. It incentivizes things. When you ration by first come, first serve, it incentivizes waiting in long lines. Imagine if instead Florida State said, we'll give the 3,000 tickets to the 3,000 students with the highest GPAs. What do you encourage then? Well, spend those 3 days studying to get the tickets rather than 3 days wasting in line. Right? So economists are all about price rationing. We think price rationing is good. When you ration things by price, what it does is it encourages production in the economy, because if I want to buy something, I want to buy that football ticket, I'm going to have to go out and provide tutoring services or go work at McDonald's or go get a job so that I can earn the income to buy those things. So when we ration by price, it encourages people to go out and produce for others, to get other goods produced for others to consume so that they have the income to be able to purchase things. Fundamentally, the reason that a lot of things are scarce is because our resources that we have to produce things are scarce. We talk about different categories of resources. Land, labor, and capital are usually the three biggest categories we talk about. It's important to define capital appropriately, particularly for later in this course. A lot of people tend to think of capital very broadly, and you could think about money, like financial capital. But to an economist in economics, when we think about capital, what we think about is man-made resources that go into the production of other resources. So if we're looking at today as kind of a production process, I'm the labor, the land's pretty obvious, it's the land we're in, but everything else in this room, from this pen to the whiteboard to the chairs you're sitting in, is capital. Right? Capital can be machinery, like typewriters, computers, all those things, big robotics equipment, all that's capital as well. But capital is when people take and they're going to produce, you have a choice. You can either produce things for current consumption, we can make pizzas and beer, or we can spend our time making capital goods. Problem with capital goods is you can't eat them. You can't eat robots and you can't eat, all these things. But then what happens is in the future, we can produce more. So most economics textbooks have a cute little story about the Robinson Crusoe stranded on an island, and he's out fishing for food, and he decides to try to give up 3 days of fishing to go hunt for supplies to build a net, and then of course with the net he's able to fish more in the future and catch more in the future. So we look at investment as this taking time away from producing current goods for current consumption and to producing capital equipment which can expand our future production possibilities. So that's just some of the highlights of the introductory thing. The next section in Chapter 1 talks about the 8 guideposts to economic thinking. Everything you will learn in economics ties back in one way or another to 8 fundamental principles in economics. And I'm just going to try to hit the highlights of these. I may not do all 8 of them, but all of them are in the chapter. The first and most important idea in all of economics is the idea that incentives matter. That is, when we change the cost and benefits associated with people's choices, they respond in predictable ways. And it's not just monetary cost and benefits that matter. Good example. How many of you, when you walk down the street, see a penny, you bend down and you pick it up? How many people pick up pennies? All right, well, keep your hands up for me for a minute because we're going to just increase that amount and see who would. I assume you guys would pick up a nickel too, so that's what I'm saying, keep them up. All right, I'm going to see where it takes to get everybody's hand up. Nickels. You pick up nickels, dimes, quarters, dollar bill, $20 bill. Have I got everybody a $20 bill? Okay, so everybody in here would take the time. It's the same action. Right? But what I've done is increase the rewards so you're more likely to do it. Now on the cost side, right, I might normally bend down and pick up a quarter, no problem. But if it was out in the middle of the interstate, I'm not going to dodge traffic to get a quarter. Probably take a $100 bill for me to go out and dodge traffic on the interstate, right? But there's a lot of other non-monetary incentives. Like if I was on a first date with a girl, hey, I saw a quarter, I'd probably leave that thing. I don't want her to think I'm a cheapskate and need to go around picking up quarters, right? And to an economist, we would phrase that in a way that maybe non-economists would mean that's an incentive. Yes, because I care that this person likes me and I'm making a good impression. So from my own personal standpoint, that is an incentive. My rewards that I face in my life. So we think about incentives in a manner very similar to psychology in terms of positive and negative reinforcement. It doesn't have to be dollars. But the most important idea is that it's troubling to economists that a lot of people just say, oh, these things don't matter. Oh, this stuff just doesn't matter. And it's really weird because to an economist, our whole literature is based on this. We've tested it over and over. We know it matters. We know it matters to everybody in every aspect of life. I mean, it may not be when the price of chicken goes up that everybody quits buying chicken. We'll talk about that next week. But certainly people cut back on chicken, less chicken is sold. We can test it in the data. We see these things, right? And incentives influence our choices of everybody in every regard, even on some cases that you might not think that. One good example is I've got a colleague who used to give an example of some data on there was a city somewhere that put in some special funeral services tax or something like that. Basically, it raised the cost of funerals by about $500 in the town. And he asked the students, what happens to the number of funerals in that town? Well, the students who just really turn off their heads and don't want to talk about economics say, look, same number of people die. This won't influence anything. But anybody who's had a little bit of economics knows that's not true. Because there's a lot of alternatives to being buried in that town. You could be cremated, buried in the next town over. Sure enough, funerals fell in half in that town in 1 year. Everything's influenced by incentives. Even my daughter. My daughter, when she was a little bit younger, was in school and they had a spelling test every week. And the way it worked was this. On Monday, she gave everybody a pop quiz of 10 words, like a pre-test. And And if you got all 10 right, you got a challenge list. If you missed at least one of them, then you got that same list, and then there was the real test on Friday. So the Monday test didn't count. The Friday test counts, but which test you take on Friday depends on how you do the pre-test on Monday. My daughter is a better speller than I am. And guess what she used to do every Monday? Intentionally misspell one of those words. I mean, think about the incentive she faces, right? She's like, Dad, if I get them all right, that doesn't count for anything. Then I get this list where I'm probably going to miss one or two at the end of the week and make an 80. She said, if I just misspell one at the beginning of the week, even though I know them all, then I don't even have to study and I make 100 at the end of the week. And this is like a second grader, right? You know, I mean, the point is incentives, right? We're born with this hardwired in our heads. Right? And this really goes into what economists mean when we talk about rational behavior. We don't mean morally right or wrong. What we mean is that everybody responds to incentives, even if you're crazy. Like, you know that houses with those signs that say, this home protected by ADT security, they're less likely to get broken into. In fact, you can buy fake signs even if you don't have a security system. Think about why that is true. Why is it that those houses get broken into less? Because there's some guy high on crack sitting in his car casing out your neighborhood. He wants more crack. He wants to break into your house, and he's trying to identify which house has the highest take, but what does he care about? Well, when he gets his income, he can't be doing many drugs in jail. He doesn't want to go to jail. So he's trying to say, what's my risks here? Well, if I break in that house, it's more likely I end up in jail because they got a security system. If I break into this house, it doesn't have a security system, I'm less likely to go to jail. I mean, the point is, this incentives matter thing, you can push it extremely to its limit. You know, economists, when we first started mandating airbags in automobiles, Sam Pelzman came out with an article about how that should influence driver behavior. If you make cars safer, how should people drive them? More recklessly. Right? The data proves it. In fact, one of the coolest papers on this, just a little self-promotion, is one I did. The economists have trouble testing that stuff because across states there's so much difference in weather and whatever. So one of my PhD students and I did a study of NASCAR. And we hand-collected data on every NASCAR race going back to the 1940s, 50s, whatever it was, since the beginning of NASCAR, on individual drivers, the number of wrecks they're in, how close they're doing, number of caution laps, everything. And you know there's been all these safety improvements in NASCAR through time, well-defined safe. Every time they do that, guess what the drivers do? Drive closer, getting more wrecks. Even if you follow one driver through time, like Dale Earnhardt, every time the cars get safer, he's in more wrecks. It's crazy, right? But people, you know, do this. And there was a cool interview on ESPN. They had this female IndyCar driver who crashed into a wall, flipped, caught on fire. She walks away unscathed. And they're interviewing her saying, now aren't you scared, you know, now that you're out there? And she says, scared? She said, you know, I was always scared before. Now that I know I can wreck like that and just walk away, she said, I'm going to be taking more risks because there's a couple races I could have won by trying to do a cut inside. I was scared I'd lose control. Now I'm not scared to anymore. You know, but the point is that you've got to open your mind to the idea that incentives matter in every aspect of public policy and tease out what those incentives are. The problem is a lot of times we tend to focus very narrowly on the incentives and don't broaden out our analysis far enough. A good example is that I teach an economics course for K through 12 teachers as a summer component, and then they come back in the fall and tell us about what they taught in their courses. And there's a really cute story. This teacher comes back and says, you know, here was the problem. I live in a poor school district. I provide pencils for my students out of my own pocket, and they keep losing them. He said, so after I had your course, let me tell you what I did. I went back and I told the students, if you use up your whole pencil, come get a new pencil and give me your old one that's run out. I'll give you a new pencil and a dime. He said, brilliant idea, right? Because now I'm giving them an incentive to not lose their pencil. But guess what happened? Yep, you guys got it, right? So he said, but here's what happened. He said, the minute I instituted that policy, everybody's hands were going up. Sir, can I sharpen my pencil? He said, they would get up there and hold their pencil in that sharpener for as long as they were, you know, because what he'd incentivized is using up your pencils very quickly in addition to holding on to the pencil. So this is an idea in economics we call secondary effects, that often when we do policies, it changes a lot of incentives, and people respond to those in unpredictable ways or ways that we didn't think through. And sometimes those effects can be so bad, they undermine the original intent of the policy. One of the more famous examples in the economics literature is a provision in the original Endangered Species Act that basically, I can't remember which species it applied, it was red-cockaded woodpecker, I think, but long story short, you'll get the idea, is that if they find a nest here in a tree, I guess that, I'm sorry, I can't draw trees. All right, so it's on your property. They draw this radius around it and say, okay, you can't do anything to that part of your property. I can't remember the dimensions, like 500 yards or something like that. So it's not that you lose your property, but you can't do anything to it. You can't cut down trees. You can't build anything on it if there's, a red cockaded woodpecker nest here. Well, that's great and dandy, but the problem is that these birds only nest in one particular species of tree, and the tree has to be old enough that it's like hollowed inside or whatever. I mean, it's a very narrow number of trees these birds can nest in. So here's the problem. You look out in your property, you're walking around, this is maybe a piece of property you and your new spouse purchased to build a home on. When you save up some money, you go out there and you see one of those 50-year-old red maple trees there. There's no nest in it yet. What do? Cut down that tree before one of them darn birds nest in there and you can't use your property, right? So about half of the population of these trees was clear cut, right? The minute this law gets passed, because what we did is we turned the bird into a cost for people. People didn't want the bird on their property, right? So people went out and tried to cut down the trees before they landed in them because they were scared that the bird would land there. I mean, not that I think we should do this policy, but imagine the difference of one that said, if we find a red cockaded woodpecker nest on your property, we send you a check for $100,000. People planting seeds everywhere trying to attract those things, So, the problem is often we design policies and they have these unintended consequences or secondary effects. And it's very important in policy to think those through if you want to do a good analysis. The next important topic to talk about in economics is the concept of opportunity cost. You're spending an hour here today. It means you're giving up an hour of something else you could be doing. See, we live in a world of scarcity, so when you choose one thing, you have to give up other things. And this is, to an economist, the concept of opportunity cost. So like, for example, in a traditional college classroom, you talk about the opportunity cost of going to college. When a kid spends 4 years in college, suppose they hadn't gone to college. They probably would have gone out and got a job making, let's just make up a number, easy to use, $25,000 a year for 4 years. They're giving up $100,000 in income just to go to college. Forget tuition, forget room and board. You're giving up basically an entry-level Ferrari, right, to go to college in terms of foregone income of $100,000, right? So opportunity costs influence people in the same way other kinds of costs and benefits do. But they're really important because it's really about the concept of trade-offs. And it really helps us to analyze public policy in more productive and easier ways. Like a good example of this is airbags cost about $400 cost per airbag installed in the car. From the manufacturer's standpoint, it costs about $400 per airbag. So when we mandate airbags, it raises the cost of cars, right? And the NTSB says airbags save about 750 lives per year in the US, right? And about 400 per bag. So I don't know the exact numbers. We'll just tease up something. Suppose there's 10 million cars sold a year, so that would be like $4 billion a year we're spending on airbags to save 750 lives. Is this a good policy or not? Well, this is when people start cringing, going, oh, you're going to try to put a number on price, on human life. No, this is the beauty of opportunity cost. We don't have to do that. If we're spending, making up the number, $4 billion a year on airbags, the question, and we're saving 750 lives, the question is, could we have spent the $400 billion in another way that would have saved more than 750 lives? That's the relevant question in economics. When you're spending money on a policy or doing something, it's eating up resources. Are you achieving the best? Maybe if we devoted that same money to breast cancer research, we could have saved even more lives. Maybe spending the money we spend on airbags on breast cancer research saves more lives than it does putting airbags in cars. But that's rational policy analysis. And if you don't do this kind of opportunity cost thing, you make some really bad decisions in policy. It's all about trade-offs. So I'll give you a historical example, and then we'll try to tease it into some current ones. There's something called the broken window fallacy that you may have heard of. I don't even know why I'm writing it. Forget it. Broken window fallacy. Look at the size of that pen, will you? This is Washington for you right here. I've never had a pen that big in my life to use. Imagine all the starving children we could have fed with it. All right, the broken window fallacy goes something like this. So I know how we can create jobs. We'll throw baseballs through windows. Because see, when you throw a baseball through a window, that creates a job because somebody has to make the new window, install the new window. There's your jobs program. Throw baseballs through windows. Does anybody see a problem with that program? Does it create jobs?
No.
Well, it does in the window industry. But there's this whole other side of it. right? The whole other side of it, what Bastiat calls the seen and the unseen. The seen is the job that's created in the window industry. The unseen is the fact that some shop owner now has to spend, $200 repairing that window. Had he not spent the $200 repairing the window, he would have spent the $200 in some other way, which would have created jobs as well, right? And so maybe he had gone out and bought a new machine for something. Or if we take a personal example about me at my house, if I have to spend $200 on a new window, that's a new TV I don't get. So the difference in the worlds is this, is if you don't break my window, I have a new TV and some people are employed making TVs. If you break my window, people are employed too, same amount of people, but now I don't have a TV and I'm stuck with just a window that was the same window I had before, but I had to pay to get it fixed. It's as stupid as saying that hurricanes, create wealth. Right? You can't destroy a city and create wealth. You're destroying things. When we think about things, when you destroy productive assets, that's not a way to move forward for an economy. But there's so many public policies that don't take this into account. At my former university, we started a recycling program. And everybody was like, great, we're going to recycle, save all these resources, except that darn recycling truck used to sit out in front of the building for an hour with the engine running, burning gas while they were collecting their thing. And my grad students were like, we ought to do a study on this. They're burning up more energy than they're saving with the recycling. But it gets worse. There's some really good examples in the literature, one of which is the energy-efficient shower heads that we all hate because you can't wash the soap out of your hair. You think you're saving the world? Well, let me tell you the problem with that. Energy-efficient shower heads do save water, and that saves resources. But do you know how you make a shower head more energy efficient? You put like 2 or 3 extra parts inside the shower head. Where do those parts come from? Well, geez, let's think about it. They're made in factories, and what do those factories use? Electricity, water, the electricity burns coal, we've got all the resources. I mean, the fundamental question, if you were thinking about is this a good policy or not, is trading off the resources used to make the shower head versus the resources we're saving. But when we don't think about the opportunity cost, we just look at the visible benefits, we make really horrible policy choices because we don't consider the alternatives, right? What could have been had we left the resources and their alternative uses. So there's a lot of good examples like that, and there's some really good ones in the books as well. But basically, we face trade-offs everywhere in our lives, whether it's saving, consuming choices, labor, leisure, all these things, and more parking, less green space, more green space, less parking, whatever. All these things are trade-offs, and they all deal with opportunity cost, and that's going to be an important part as we move forward in the course. The next thing that's really important to understand is that when humans are making choices, we make decisions at the margin, which means changes or additional. And this is really important for tax policy, so I want to spend a few minutes on it. And let me try to tease it out with an example that forces you to think about how you make decisions. Suppose that you wanted to go to McDonald's for lunch today, and you were just going to get a hamburger and a drink. And you look up there, and the hamburger's $1, and the drink's $1. And then you keep looking and, oh wait, value meal number 6 has a hamburger, a drink, and a French fry for $2.25. Phrase the decision to yourself in your head. What would you ask yourself?
Do I need everything?
Is it worth what? Okay, where does 25 cents come from is the most important thing I need you guys to figure out. I didn't put, if there's a $2.25 and there's dollars, I don't see 25. Where are you guys getting 25? You're taking this and you're subtracting. You're looking at the change, right? You're saying the total cost of this is $2. The total cost of this is $2.25. The additional cost is 25 cents. And if you do the math on the words, you had what? Hamburger plus a drink. And now you get hamburger, drink, and French fry. Those are the same, so the difference is the fry. So you're trading off, is it worth 25 cents for the fry? All right, this is the way humans make choices. We look at changes, margins, when we make choices in life. And the reason that this is so critically important is, let me just put it in the context of the example. Notice that this is the exact same decision as if I changed the numbers to $2, $2, and $4.25. Same decision. Is it worth 25 cents for the fries? So when you're making policies that affect things, right, you may be thinking, okay, well, it's changing this, that was changing. Well, what you need to think is, how is it changing the marginal cost and the marginal benefits of things? That's what critically matters, right? And so when we talk about tax policy, we often focus on marginal tax rates and things like that, because it's at the margin that people are making choices about, do I build one additional factory? Do I hire one additional worker? Do I do things at the margin? Do I take on extra work? You know, so when people are making decisions at the margin, it's really important to be able to pinpoint how what we're doing is affecting the choices people are making at the margin. The other thing that's kind of important that I'm not going to spend too much time on to point out about this marginal stuff is basically that prices, when we get to supply and demand, prices in the economy are determined by the marginal value of things, not the total value of things. The little story here goes back as far as Adam Smith, the father of economics. He spent the last decade or so of his life worried about something he called the diamond water paradox, which is how can it be that water, which is essential for human life, is so cheap, the price is so low, but yet diamonds, which we could live without, are priced so high? Like if prices reflect value, shouldn't water, because water's more important, be priced higher than diamonds? It was a puzzle to him. Well, that's because back in Adam Smith's day, we didn't understand marginal analysis. We didn't understand that for another 100 years in economics. So with our tools in marginal analysis, we do understand this now. If I sat here and had a diamond in one hand, a bottle of water in the other, and I said, take whichever one you want, which one do you grab? Which one do you value more at the margin? See, the difference between here is we need to think about the margin. Right? Given how much diamonds and water you already have, how much do you want one more? What's the marginal value? How much would you pay for one more gallon of water versus how much would you pay for one more diamond? That's the key. I mean, think about what you do with water in your life. You know, if we lived on Mars, we'd be fighting over the water, forget the diamonds, but that's not where we live. We live here in America. And in America, we have a lot of water. What's the least valuable thing you probably do with water every day? Yeah, you flush your toilet. You poor girls, I know you're going to be disadvantaged in this, but do you know what 3 GPF means on the toilet? See, we have to look at it, so we read all the stuff on the toilet. You guys are turning the other way. But it's like, it says 3 GPF. You know what GPF is? Even a urinal is 1 GPF, gallons per flush, right? Gallon of water, right? Right, so, you know, we keep fish, we water our lawns, you know, we don't throw away diamonds like that, right? So, you know, at the margin, right now, given how much water and how much diamonds we have, it's possible, in other words, for the total value of something to exceed the total value of something else, but that the marginal values are in the opposite direction. That is, something could be more valuable in total, but less valuable at the margin. Right? So in other words, if I said, here's your choice, give up all the diamonds you own and never own any more, or give up all the water you have and never have any more. Now that choice is a different choice, because I'm not just giving you a choice of one more or one less. I'm taking away everything, including that 1 unit of water that keeps you alive every day. Now it's like no-brainer. I'll take the water over that. All right, so anyway, this is why, for example, pro wrestlers make more than nurses. You know, people are like, I don't understand. How, teachers are more important or nurses are more important than pro wrestlers. Well, look, it's easier to find one more nurse, one more teacher than it is to find one more Ric Flair. I'm sorry, it's just the way it is, right? You know, if there was plenty of really good pro wrestlers and very few nurses, it would be reversed, but it's not, right? So, you know, and again, one of the things about economics is that we are a science. So we don't try to, when we think about prices and these things, we don't attach rights and wrongs to them. We just think about it like gravity. Like to a physicist, you know, gravity, is it good or bad? They don't think of it like that. That's not how you think of it. Gravity happens and we can study it. And what we know is that pro wrestlers make more than nurses in every economy. It's not something weird to, or in every state. You know, it's not, these are things that we witness everywhere, and we try to understand them and explain them. It's not a right and wrong thing. All right. The next topic is that value is subjective. So the value of things is different to different people, and that's beautiful because it makes trade possible. One of the few things I did very much like about my ex-wife is that I love onions and hate tomatoes, but she loves tomatoes and hated onions. So when we used to go out to a restaurant and they would bring our salads, guess what we would do? Trade. I said, hey, psst, I'll give you my tomatoes for your onions. She said, all right. Now let me ask you one fundamental question. We trade. Are we both better off, both worse off, or is one better off, one worse off? Both better off. This is one of the most fundamental ideas in all of economics. In fact, there's a lot of economists, including Milton Friedman, who say, you know, a misunderstanding of that one concept is what most people, when they make economic fallacies, that's what they're forgetting. Voluntary exchange makes both parties better off. Right? It creates wealth. If you want to create wealth and make people happier, you need more trades and more exchanges. Voluntary trade makes both people better off. right? So we might see somebody like, Steve Jobs or Bill Gates making all this money and think that came from, no, those were all earned through exchanges with other people. And guess what happened on the other side of the exchange? You like your iPad? Yes. You didn't have to buy that. That was like you getting the tomato for the onion, whichever side you want to be on. And they have plenty of iPads and they wanted the money more. So they're happier, you're happier, both win. In fact, what that huge amount is a signal of how much wealth he's created on the other side of the exchange as well. In other words, if I end up with a lot of darn onions on my plate, it means I've given away a lot of tomatoes and made a lot of tomato lovers happy, right? So voluntary exchange makes both parties better off. And this is very, very important in understanding especially the cost of taxes and how taxes get in the way in the economy. When taxes reduce the quantity of exchanges that happen in a marketplace, right? So let me try to foreshadow this, and I'll even be a little more particular. When we think about what's the cost of, say, we start taxing, I don't know, iPads, $1,000 tax per iPad. We're going to raise revenue, and we can look at the revenue numbers, and somebody might say, well, the cost of this tax in the economy is, and use the revenue number and say, that's the cost of the tax. No. To an economist, that's part of the cost of the tax. But the other part of the cost of the tax is something we call deadweight loss or excess burden. And what that is the reduction in the quantity of exchanges that are taking place in the marketplace. So imagine if half of you now have to go without iPads. Well, you're worse off. Steve Jobs is worse off. Well, Apple is worse off because they're not making profit. Those losses in those exchanges are a cost of tax policy. And take it to the extreme. Suppose you put a tax on shoes, $1 million tax on every pair of shoes. So nobody buys, and let's assume it's so big that nobody in America buys shoes anymore. How much revenue have you raised? Zero. So is the cost of that tax zero? No, there's a lot of people hurting their feet all over the place because we don't have darn shoes, right? So that's what I'm saying. All these the foregone benefits that are evaporated as a result of reduction in exchanges is critically important in tax policy, and I'm sure we'll get into more detail about that later in the course. All right, just two more little quick of the guideposts, a couple more things to do here. Information is costly. Therefore, we shouldn't expect everybody to be fully informed when they make choices, and hey, that's okay. For example, I bet when you went to buy your last car, you probably did some research, Consumer Reports, read some reviews, but did you know Consumer Reports did a special issue on pens and pencils? Did you happen to pick that one up before you bought your last pen or pencil? No. Why? Why do you spend the time to research cars but not pens and pencils? Well, because who cares if I make a mistake? It's 10 cents, right? I'll just try another one. Right? When we can experiment at low cost, why spend an hour of my time when I can experiment on my own? It's cheaper to do that than to get the information. So imagine we come out and say, look, it's important that everybody has information, and we don't care what the cost is of it, we're just going to mandate it. So we require everybody to read Consumer Reports before they buy a pen or pencil. Made society better off or worse off? Worse off. Right? And so all these mandates, all this information stuff to the extent, no such thing as a free lunch, right? I had a young student who wanted to start a hot sauce business. He was an entrepreneurial student, Woolheater's Hot Sauce. You know that stupid little label that has all the nutritional things? Well, he makes this stuff out of ingredients at home. You think he knows what that is? No. But you can send your product off and get tested, and then you'll know all that stuff. That cost a lot of money to get that test done. So much that he's like, I can't even afford to get this done. Never ended up starting his business. But he's like, just getting that one label, the information for it is so costly. And I'm not saying just because of him we shouldn't do that. But I'm just saying that information is costly, and so that's kind of important. But it also explains why people choose to gather information on some things and not on other things. I know that a lot of people always go off about how few people know the names of their congressmen, their representatives. Fewer people, for example, know the name of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court than know the name of Judge Judy. Right? And people, oh, it's horrible, it's horrible. Funny thing is, you teach an honors class and it's the same proportion. It's really odd, right? The point is, people choose not to remember this. And I always show this in my class because what I'll do is I'll pull up the website, and I'll try to like downplay it, but I'll be like, okay, and so here's the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, or here's Speaker of the House, or whichever example I'm using that day. I'll talk about, and then I'll just go on. About 30 minutes later in class, I stop, and I know it's down by then. We've gone on for 30 minutes now, but how many of you remember that guy's name? It was just about, I just told you the information, and they chose to forget it. They don't want to remember it. Why do they not want to remember it? Well, because your brain space is scarce. There's only so many things you can remember, or you only remember the things that are important. You know, if you had a job interview tomorrow at the guy's office, you might learn his name. No, but the point is, to the vast majority of people, that information just really isn't something that really gets them ahead in life. Doesn't get them a girlfriend, doesn't get them a job, whatever, then I'm not going to learn it. So anyway, this is very predictable things that we can understand with economic theory. And then the last guidepost is the test of its theories, ability to predict. So economics, we test all of our theories. It's kind of hard in the real world because there's all this messy stuff going on that's complicating it. You know, all of our theories are done with ceteris paribus assumptions, meaning if we say like if the price of chicken goes up, less chicken's going to be sold. We mean holding everything else constant. If it happens to be chicken barbecue weekend, then even though the price is higher, maybe that you sell more or whatever. So, I mean, you're changing other things that are influencing it. So, you know, one of the things to be careful of in economic analysis is when we're looking at data and how things relate to one another. Often other things to explain things as they are, what is, and we try to stay away from normative things to large extent, oughts. So, you know, we will do research on things like, does a higher minimum wage increase or decrease employment? Right? And we can find, hey, higher minimum wage reduces employment, but that's a separate question than is raising or lowering the minimum wage a good or bad idea? Because you could have different things that you weight, right? It may be that even if you think that it lowers employment, that you say, well, it's worth it. I don't know. But, so the point is we stick to the positive questions and try to provide the answers to those. But there's always overriding things that are more normative, that are value judgments or statements of opinion that economics tries not to do as much. Last thing in chapter 1, pitfall to avoid economic thinking, besides violating that ceteris paribus assumption, is that association isn't causation. Just because we see two things happening together doesn't necessarily mean that one causes the other. All right, and so, you know, there's the cute little correlations in finance, mostly with the stock market. One's called the sunspot theory, but I can't remember which direction it works, but when there's more sunspots active, stock market either rise or fall, I can't remember, but it's a pretty strong relationship through time. The funniest paper in finance is one that goes all the way back to the 1800s and measures women's dress length. It was a hemline, is that the right word for it? And measures hem length, I don't know, but they've got data on the opening Paris, unbelievably correlates with the stock market pretty well. But you know what, if you measure enough darn different things and you throw them up, you're gonna find something that works, right? You could, you know, what predicts what days it rains in DC? If you collected enough other data, it's like every day Jim sneezes. You know, and it's like, what? You know, every day he wears blue socks. You know, you're gonna, if you hunt enough stuff, you're gonna find that. So the problem is you can't always, just because two things happen together, you can't always conclude that they cause one another. And that's why it's important to have theory in addition to data. Because data can sometimes give us these false conclusions that you really need a theoretical underpinning to explain. Why would it make sense that dress length would, I mean, at least tease me out a logical thing. I mean, I can imagine somebody at least putting a theory behind the sunspot thing about how much radiation we get affecting our men, whatever. At least there would be a theory there, but just raw data correlations don't tell us much. So, you know, when we debate things like the Great Depression come out, we had those New Deal programs. Yeah, but there's a lot of other stuff going on too. Yes, we see these things correlated, but that doesn't mean just because they're correlated it caused it. Right? In fact, there's a substantial debate about what things caused the Great Depression and what things got us out of it. You know, looking at this, it's not as simple as just looking at raw correlations in the data. All right. Kind of moving into some of the topics in chapter 2, there's really three things that I want to hit. The first is talking about private property rights. Private ownership rights are the cornerstone of a market economy. You simply can't have a free market, capitalist-based economy without private property rights. Private ownership rights basically create four very powerful incentives that help to do things. First is that it creates a strong incentive for owners to give proper care of things. That is, when we do studies about things that are privately owned versus things that are commonly owned or unowned, people tend to take better care of things they privately own. So for example, a study on that looks at rental property, rental houses, rental apartments, rental houses versus houses that people own, or rental cars versus cars that people own. What do you think about the longevity? I mean, this is science, right? This is what we see it over and over. Everywhere we look, you know, you see public roadways, public beaches. They're the ones littered. People's yards, same people who might litter there or don't. One of the funnier examples that we always usually try to give is the one about the common refrigerator at your office. I mean, I don't know. This is how good we try to predict stuff, and as long as it predicts, right? Common refrigerators are always dirty. It's really weird, right? And it's so funny because at my office, it's like a bunch of professors, at home their refrigerators aren't like that. They're not. These aren't slobs, right? These are, but yet there's year-old stuff in there, mold growing, whatever. And then the sink's always dirty, and I love it. Here's how brilliant people are, right? So they put up a sign at work thinking this will solve the problem. Put up a sign that says, please treat this as if it were your own. What, you think the sign's going to help, dude? The problem is it's not their own, and you can't solve that by putting up a sign, right? So when we look at things that are privately owned, they tend to be better cared for than things that are commonly owned. Berry College in Georgia, for example, the Student Government Administration went out and bought 10 Schwinn Cruiser bicycles, put Berry Bike sign on them, and the rule was they were free to use around campus. You could, anytime you saw one, you could get on it, ride it. You just couldn't chain it up, couldn't take it off campus. And the idea is, wouldn't that be great if you come out of class, you're late for your next one, you can hop on a bike, ride over to the other building, just leave it for somebody else. Yeah, well, I got a picture in the textbook of one of the Berry bikes all crumbled up from the student newspaper. I got a colleague or economist friend who's at Berry College, so he kept sending me all the clippings on it. Unfortunately, there used to be one of the bike wrapped around a tree. But anyway, all these get destroyed within months, and the Student Government Administration's up in arms. How could this possibly happen? We've never had a problem with any of the other bikes on campus before. We don't understand this. Well, that's because all the other bikes are privately owned. Right? The point is this, is that you can't, these things are like the law of gravity. You can't wish it not to be true. When you have commonly owned stuff, it's just not taken care of as well as privately owned stuff. And it's not as conserved as well for the future. People don't tend to invest. A good example of this is when I was in college, I lived with 3 other guys. And guess what was in our refrigerator? It was empty. And it wasn't that we didn't want to have a bunch of beer and food in the refrigerator. Here was the problem. If I went to the store, bought some beer and some pizzas or whatever, and stuck them in the fridge and went off to class, when I came home, it was empty because they were all ate and drank. I mean, it was just free for all. I need food in the refrigerator, right? So nobody would invest because when you came back, there was nothing there. See, the beauty of graduating from college is you finally get your own refrigerator. See, I have my own refrigerator now. And see, I know that even though I leave town for 2 days and come home, guess there's going to be stuff in my fridge when I get back. So I've got really fancy beer in there. I've got food to eat tonight. It's so much nicer. But we tend to see this over and over in terms of that. The problems with commonly owned property, they tend to get not taken as good care of, used up more rapidly, is often called the tragedy of the commons or the common pool problem, if you see those terminology. Ronald Coase won a Nobel Prize in economics for basically pointing out that most of the problem areas that we see in the world are areas where there's a problem with property rights. Not that you can always solve them by privatizing them, it's just pointing out that that's the problem. So when we look at air pollution, who owns the air? No one. Polluted rivers and lakes and streets, nobody owns them. Right? And then, so if we look at these problem areas, they're problems where there's unclear property rights or lack of ownership rights, right? So, a lot of economists in environmental policy try to figure out how you can either privatize them or put in place some sort of privatized kind of structure, like tradable pollution permits or things that some way can bring market mechanisms and ownership shares to things. It's been pretty successfully used in some of the harvesting areas, like, we overfish the oceans because that's a common pool as well. But if you look up in Maine and the Apalachicola Bay, the oyster areas, those people have done pretty good trying to set up little property rights areas or tradable permits for how many you can harvest. It's really helped bring their harvest and their crops back. One of my favorite examples of this is if I can do this up here real quick. I'm going to do 2 columns. Cows, pigs, chicken, dogs, I don't know. And I'll put African elephant. I don't know, I'm going to mix it up. Blue whale. That's good enough. We'll stop there. All right, I'm just making stuff up anyway. What's the difference in the animals on the left, animals on the right? Yeah, by the way, I've been teaching for like 25 years. Probably longer than that now. I don't want to think about it. All right, anyway, it's not that matters. My favorite answer in my whole time teaching is, student yells out, all the ones on the right column have 2 names. And I thought that was my favorite. It's like as a teacher, you get one of the answers that's wrong, but if you think about it, it's so cute that you want to give it an A anyway. It wasn't like an exam, but I'm like, that is kind of true because, the more narrowly you define a species, there's just fewer of them. If you're like the red-eared, green-backed, cheat river salamander, dude, you're just screwed. You're going extinct. There's plenty of salamanders, but that narrow, it's like there's so few of these things. But anyway, that's not what right? These are endangered, these aren't. But here's the important point of it is why, right? And a lot of people think the reason that elephants are going extinct is because we kill them for their ivory and their tusk. It's the human demand for these things that causes them, to die because we want to use their products. Really? Well, let's tease out the true hypothesis. The hypothesis you're proposing is that when humans have a species that we want to kill for human consumption, we drive it to extinction. Which side of the list is the animal that we kill most for human consumption on? How about number 2? How about number 3? That's why they're there, right? We got a shortage of these things? No, and in fact, think about the people who raise them and own them. They're the equivalent of the ivory poachers. They're the people who are going to kill them for you and sell them for a profit. But the difference is they own them. And when you have a herd of cows, when you're down to 1 cow, 1 bull, you got some choices to make. If you want income next year, you better breed them and get a herd going and manage your herd and cull your herd. When you have a trout pond, you don't overfish it because you want there to be some there next year. Right? And so when things are privately owned, the dynamics are so different than they are when it's commonly owned. So what happens in common owned, like there's an elephant out there, those tusks are worth like $5,000. Some poacher sees him and he says, you know what, if I don't shoot him, there'll be more elephants next year and I can shoot more next year, so I won't shoot him. So you put your gun down, then the elephant walks around the corner, what do you hear? Pow! Somebody else gets him. Because it's a free-for-all, right? It's kind of like the pizza or the drinks at a party where everybody just grabs as much as they can, as quick as they can. Overfishing the oceans kind of problem, right? Because it's not owned. Now, what of course happened, and the reason I like to tell this is that a lot of countries in Africa have been experimenting since the late 1970s with privatization of rhinos, elephants, and things like this. And in the countries like the Campfire Program was the UN program that did this. And I guess in data it's not really important to put up. But basically, just to contrast some countries here, Kenya did not participate in this. And in 1970, this is 79, I'll just put the year up, right? And so in Kenya in 1979, there were how many? There were 65,000 elephants alive in Kenya in 79. And then in Zimbabwe and Botswana in 79, there was 50,000, so they had fewer. Right, well, Zimbabwe and Botswana adopted the Campfire Program, and at the 10-year report, and this is older data, but it's followed through today with some exceptions from Zimbabwe. The 10-year UN report tracked how well the Campfire Program was using. So these are the countries where they basically privatized the elephants. This is the country where they didn't. 10 years later, the elephant population falls to 19,000 in the countries where they're protected by the government, everybody, and in the country where they privatized them, population almost doubled to 94,000. So in the countries that have experimented with private ownership of these things, the populations are starting to rebound. And it's been so successful, they've extended to the black rhino, white rhino, and a bunch of other populations to help bring them back. But anyway, property rights are important. And there's a lot to that. Okay, only 2 topics left. Production possibilities. Every economy basically faces a choice as to what to produce. And our simplest model, we tend to try to make things simple, particularly 2-dimensional, so we can draw them. So let me kind of do a fictitious little example here. Suppose you're the king of a country. So you have some workers, some land, some machines to produce stuff. Let's assume you could only produce 2 goods, because I only got 2 axes and I don't want to do an 80-dimensional graph. So what 2 fun goods can we use to entertain ourselves? Throw me out 2 fun things you would produce if you were a king. Please your population.
Wine.
Wine and
Guns.
Wine and guns. Now you're getting dangerously close to be doing the guns butter thing, which is where this has started from Samuelson. Anyway, all right, so here's the idea. If you throw all your people making wine, you make a bunch of wine and no guns. If you throw all your people making guns, you get a lot of guns and no wine. And then there's all these combinations in the middle. We tend to have this production possibilities curve that looks kind of bowed out, and there's a lot of fancy reasons behind that. But the point is an economy faces a trade-off here. Anytime, say we're producing this much wine and this many guns, and your population is storming outside your capital with the torches, like you see on the TV thing, and they're like, we want more guns, we want more guns. All right, to give them more guns, what do you have to do? To get more guns, you have to produce less wine. Okay, and this is fundamentally important, right? So the economy as a whole faces trade-offs. We've only got so many productive assets. When we expand production in some areas, we contract production in other areas because resources flow out of those areas into the other areas. For everybody that's hired to do this job, that's one fewer person available to do other things. For every piece of land, every building, every machine that's occupied producing this, we give up that resource, produce something else. So, a lot of policies change basically this mix of things. The guns butter one was one that was used very frequently during World War II because basically a wartime economy, right? We need more guns. We have to give up all these, consumer goods. There was rationing during World War II because we had a lot fewer consumer goods because we had to convert our industries to defense industries, right? So our economy faces these trade-offs between producing some things, producing others, and this is really important. And you can even think about this in the standpoint of what we were talking about earlier about we can produce either goods for current consumption, beer and pizzas, or we can use our resources to produce capital goods, which go into future production. So you can think about an economy kind of having a trade-off. Instead of putting wine and guns, we could talk about, how much stuff do we produce for current consumption, and how much stuff, do we do for investment? Consumption versus investment. So we could devote more of our resources towards building machinery and buildings and things that produces stuff in the future, or we can eat a lot today and have less investment, but we face these trade-offs. Economies that choose to consume less and invest more are going to grow more rapidly because there's more capital formation, and they'll be able to produce more in the future, right? So you can use this model for a lot of different things. The very last thing I want to talk about in my few minutes I have left is about the idea of comparative advantage and free trade. Economics has a long, rich history in analyzing international trade and trying to figure out why it is that certain countries specialize in what they specialize at. And really, the whole theory is called the theory of comparative advantage. And that's the idea that people specialize in the things that they're the low-cost producers of. And by doing so, we can all consume more things because there's more produced. And you'll notice this tendency for people to specialize is something very inherent in human nature. I had a friend helping me paint one time, and we could have split the room right down to half. You paint that half, I'll paint this half, but that isn't how we did it. One of us took the trim work, the other did the walls. When you're cleaning your apartment, you have roommates. You don't do like, I'll do half the dishes and half the... No, you say, I'll do the... when we specialize, we tend to be able to produce more. And that's exactly the way it works with the production of goods and services. And we even see it as we look in the U.S. historically, as people were moving out to the Wild West back in the 1800s. Some guy would, be out in the middle of nowhere all by himself. He'd have to build his own home, make all of his own clothes, grow all of his own food, the whole shebang, be self-sufficient. But the minute a neighbor moves in next door, guess what they start doing? Saying, hey, our family will do all the clothes if you guys will do all the whatever. Or I'll grow all the asparagus if you guys farm all the whatever, and then we'll trade. Right? This idea of specialization, trade, comparative advantage is really important. And of course, the larger the marketplace, the more finely people can specialize. And you'll see this everywhere. Like if you go to a small town, you might find one general line pet store, maybe two. But you get to a big city, boy, you can find those really cool pet stores that specialize in just reptiles or just birds. Right? Because there's a large enough consumer base for people to specialize. Specialization increases your productivity and your earnings, and so when people can specialize more finely, they tend to be richer. So anyway, this is the concept that economists use when we talk about free trade and promoting free trade, and I want to kind of use it to basically talk about the opposite for a minute. There's this another example from Basquiat, which is the seen, unseen, broken window fallacy guy, is this wonderful thing he published called Unfair, well, I won't tell you the title because that gives away where I'm going with this. It's 1800s. It's a petition of the manufacturers of candles, wax lights, lamps, candlesticks, street lamps, snuffers, extinguishers, and the producers of oil, tallow, resin, alcohol, and everything connected with lighting to the messieurs, members of the Chamber of Deputies. All right, so this is like one of those letters you guys get lobbying it for something, right? It's over in England. And basically, I'll cut to the chase and only read the excerpts that really matter. It says, we are suffering from the intolerable competition of a foreign rival. He said, the moment he shows himself, our trade leaves us. All consumers apply to him, and a branch of our industry having countless ramifications is rendered completely stagnant. This rival, who is no other than the sun, wages war to us. He said, what we pray is that you may pass a law ordering the shutting up and closing up of all windows, skylights, dormer windows, outside and inside shutters, curtains, blinds, bullseyes, in a word, all openings, holes, chinks, clefts, and fissures, by or through which the light of the sun can be used to enter houses and buildings. And it goes on talking about estimating how many jobs it's going to create. I want to do that one with you real quick. Let's talk about it. Candlemaker's Petition is what it's called. Candlemaker's Petition. What we're going to do is outlaw windows. I want you to run through the winners and the losers. All right, let's take this winner side first. Who's going to gain from this? Yeah, these guys who make all the candle makers, right? And they're going to be there's more. Clearly, there's job expansion. That industry is going to expand. There's no question we see all those jobs, right? I think those are pretty obvious, right? Here's where I want to focus our time. Why is that? I don't know if you would vote for this or not, but I think you probably wouldn't. I know I wouldn't. And that's because I can do not just the seen, but the unseen pretty well in my head on this one. So help me run through it. Why is this such a bad, even though it creates these jobs, why is it not worth doing? Yeah, let's think about all the losses. Why don't you run through with me here who loses their job as a result of this? Well, why don't we put ourselves in the shoes of somebody who has a house. Right now you're getting light coming in from the outside, and they make me patch these up and shut them up, and now I have to buy more candles. Where's that money come from? I have to spend less on other things. So I buy less TVs, less whatever else I would buy, right? And there's job losses in those industries. The problem is that those are very hard to tease out. Like, we spend more money on that. Exactly who lost their job? Well, I don't know. Clearly people would. I would buy one less coffee at Starbucks. I might buy one less bag of potato chips, one less thing. So there's job losses kind of scattered in all these places. There's not as visible and as concentrated as the job gains. But there's all these job losses spread out everywhere, right? So you've got all the extra money that's spent on those things having an opportunity cost coming away from other areas, right? And of course, there's all the people who make the windows. What about those people? Right? They're now unemployed because there's no more windows going in anywhere, right? So when we think about in economics free trade policy and why we think like steel tariffs are a bad idea, we clearly see that yes, steel tariffs that protect us from foreign competition expand employment in the steel industry, no question. If you're a steel worker, you're better off. If you live in if you represent a steel, the plant stays in business. Those jobs are there, they're visible. What you don't see is all this stuff, and all the same things happen, right? When steel becomes more expensive due to the tariffs, everything made from steel goes up in price. Everybody has to pay more for those. We spend less on other areas. And as economists have done study after study on this stuff, and we know that these are bad ideas because these losses are bigger than the gains from doing stuff like this. The problem is that they're not politically as salient or as active because these things are spread out everywhere. It's easy to see these people whose votes you're going to get. I know if I vote for this bill, I'm going to get the support of the candle makers lobby next time, right? And I know the jobs I save, and they're tangible. There's people. And if I do it, the guy who loses his job at the Starbucks because I'm not spending as much money on coffee, he doesn't even know why he lost his job. I can't trace it to me, doesn't, So politics and good economics, especially in trade policy, kind of get in the way. We understand why things happen and why policies get passed, but we know that once you tease out all these unseen things, that the costs are greater than what is seen. Okay, well, that pretty much hits most of the highlights of the first two chapters. What I'm going to do next week when I see you again is talk about chapters 3 and 4, which are mostly about supply and demand, the invisible hand concept, and price controls, and some things like that. So we'll have a graph next week for supply and demand. Thank you for coming today. I hope it was good. Thank you.